Let's make a sci-fi city in Blender. Perfect for cinematics and your short films. Let's start with an empty scene, sorry default cube. Add a camera, and I like to go with the cinematic aspect ratio 1920 by 817 or 816, which is 235 aspect ratio. It looks quite good. It's the widescreen cinematic aspect ratio we're all used to. Set your focal length to something like 24 to 35. Add a ground plane and frame your camera. Then comes the most important part, blocking. I use simple cubes which are extended on the y-axis to block out how the buildings would look from my camera view. I've tried making city scenes before and failed many times because I started with making all the road systems, street lights, and then added the buildings which would actually be functional, which is a lot of work if you're not going to be using it for a game engine later, because we don't need to move around in our scene. We just need everything in the camera bounce to look good. Take your time with blocking. As you can see, I've added many buildings of different sizes. After this, I brought in some low poly background buildings. You can find these models on Sketchfab and add-ons like Blender OSM, City Builder, etc. But we just need some buildings which are going to fill up the space. I'm not concerned about them being too low poly or not very high detailed. They're going to be very back off in the distance. So I placed a bunch of these different city blocks around my scene to increase the density of my buildings. You can take time with this, look at a lot of reference images. And then I had something that looked like this. The actual shot is supposed to be a wide sweeping shot revealing the city, and then it swoops down to an alley. So I added more buildings to occupy space in the foreground as the camera moves back to reveal the alley. You can set the interpolation of your camera animation to linear to avoid the camera speeding up and slowing down during the animation. You can select both the keyframes, right click and set the interpolation mode to linear. I added buildings to be in the far background, which are not exactly physically in the right space, but I just needed the tops of the buildings to be visible to show that it's a very dense and bustling city. Blocking is the most important part, and it will depend on what reference image you choose and what is the purpose of your city scene. Next, I keyframe the camera animation for the whole length of the shot. And then I added a sky texture just for temporary lighting and to see how it looks in the rendered view. Change the altitude and the rotation of the sun according to the time of the day you want to show in your shot. Alternatively, you can also use an HDRI which fits your scene and the sky scale. Lighting is important because now you can actually visualize the scene and decide what the final camera position is going to be, and if you need to add more buildings into your shot, etc. Talking of buildings, let's start replacing our rectangular blocks with actual buildings. I was not going to model all the buildings because this is a huge city scene, but thankfully we have some free download packs from Max Hay, and it includes fully free buildings to use with emission textures for night and regular high quality textures for daytime. Max Hay is an amazing artist that I really look forward to. It's not a sponsored video. He makes amazing cyberpunk, fantasy and other types of art, and he has so much free stuff up on his website just for you guys to download and use in your scenes. He also has an environment design course. If you want to join, just check out his work and you're going to love it. And then I started replacing the blocking with the buildings from Max Hay's pack. The link is in the description below. Be creative, use different types of buildings so that it doesn't seem monotonous. It's your city after all. The design, it's completely up to you. The background buildings that I brought in had some basic low poly building textures on them, so I decided to experiment with them. I plugged the image texture into the emission and used a color ramp and a noise texture or Vorona texture to control which parts are lighting up and which parts are bright. I did this a few times for all the different background building layers I brought in and gave them different colors: orange, blue, yellow, whatever you want. If you're going for a sci-fi or cyberpunk city, the more variety you have, the better. Increase the emission strength a little bit. Then it's time for the thing we all love. Bring in a cube, scale it up to cover your scene entirely, and then add a principal volume or a volume scatter node and reduce the density. This gives an instant life and drama to your scenes like you've never seen before. I wanted to add some trains in the scene, so I went ahead and modeled a pillar support and some tracks to go along with it that could be part of a subway system. Added some small lights with emission materials to make it look cool, and then added some materials from Blender Kit. And I had a cool looking subway pillar that I can deform along any curve with an array modifier and a curve modifier. If you want to see the whole video about making roads and paths easily in Blender, you can watch the video up here. I've made a full detailed tutorial about how to make a road and deform it along any curve. I added a Bezier curve and shaped it to occupy the space in my scene where I want the subway trains to be. You can go into edit mode and adjust the curves or subdivide it if you want more smoothness. Then I brought in the subway tracks, added an array modifier for it, and then chose the mode to fit to curve. Then add a curve modifier and select the Bezier curve you made. Then I position the train tracks in my scene. You can make multiple train tracks if you want, and that's what I did. I've talked about the Sketchfab plugin before. It's an amazing tool that lets you bring in Sketchfab models directly from the website directly into Blender. You can check it out in the link below. I brought in a train model from Sketchfab and positioned it along the train tracks. The first track was quite easy as it was just straight, so animation for this train was quite simple. The windows also were completely black, so I selected them, gave them a simple emission material. I could probably use PNG images of people inside, and maybe I'll do that for the final short film. The other track was curved, so it was particularly challenging. Instead of rigging the 3 different train compartments, I added a cube to each of them and parented it that I used to animate and move the position, because the train model itself had a lot of parts and I didn't want to deal with animating all of those. And also set the interpolation mode to linear to have a constant moving speed. Then I started populating the scene wherever it seemed empty with more buildings from the Maxi pack, and I also replaced the foreground buildings with the highest quality buildings I could find. The Maxi pack has 11 different buildings that you can use in your scenes. No sci-fi city is complete without cables, so I'm going to give a shout out to another amazing plugin by Amandeep on Gumroad. This is basically a geometry nodes cables tool that lets you make cables between any 2 points that you select. You can control the diameter, the number of cables, sagging, etc. Cables are a really cool way to add realism to your scenes in a very short time. Then I added some more cables and scrubbed through the camera animation to see how it was looking. I was quite happy with the render and the lighting so far. Then I wanted to add some rails in the background when we moved down to the alley. So I added a cube, subdivided it, added a wireframe modifier, and then an array modifier to make a very simple rail. After adding some more buildings in the foreground, it was time for the neon graffiti. It's a very cyberpunk feature to have a lot of neon signs, lighting around, so that's what I went for. I found this amazing billboards and city stuff on Gumroad by Yankovic Art that is included in the link in the description below. It has a lot of neon signs, billboards, etc. and you can download it from the link. You can also make your own neon signs by using some image textures and plugging them into the emission material. I really like these large ad screens which were kind of having a CRT effect, so I placed them around in my scene. Then I downloaded some stock footage from pexels.com. I brought in the video into Blender and connected it to the emission material. You can use a mapping node if the orientation of the image is not right. You can also add a color ramp to change the tint of the screen. After adding the neon lights, the screen, and of course fog, it was looking quite good. Then I wanted to make some of the neon signs flicker, so I added a noise modifier to them in the graph editor. There's a full video about making flickering lights if you don't know how to do it. Just click the link up here. I populated the scene with many more neon signs, emissive textures, and buildings, and brought in a few more screens with different video textures. Finally, I wanted to add some steam, but I was not going to simulate all the volumetrics. So I found some transparent image sequences with steam in them and brought them into my scene. The great part about using cycles is that these interact with the light. But I found the density was too low for the steam files that I found. So I did a common Photoshop technique. I stacked a lot of them and just joined them with Ctrl J to get a more dense smoke. I placed multiple of these steam elements all around the scene. It was a lot of work, but I loved it, and this is the final render. Hope you guys enjoy it and let me know if you have any questions.